It was late evening, and the sky over the Texas plains had turned deep orange with streaks of fading gold. Rancher John Matthews was driving home after a long day checking fences and cattle. His old pickup rattled along the dirt road, raising clouds of dust that danced behind him like ghosts of another time. He lived miles away from the nearest town, and the road was always empty. But that night something caught his eye. A broken-down car pulled over near the fence line. The hood was up, smoke curling out, and beside it stood a small figure. He slowed his truck. Through the windshield he saw a little girl, maybe 7 years old, standing barefoot in the dirt. Her dress was wrinkled and dusty, and she clutched a torn blanket against the wind. For a second, John thought he was imagining it. He hadn't seen a child on this road in years. He pressed the brake and rolled down the window. The girl looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. He got out, brushing the dust off his jeans. "Evening, little one," he said gently. The girl took a step closer, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Sir, my mama can't walk anymore." The words hit him harder than he expected. She pointed toward the car. John looked and saw a woman lying on the ground beside the front tire. Her legs were stretched out, her face pale and tired. He could tell she hadn't eaten or rested in a while. The air was cooling fast, and the wind carried the smell of dry grass. He set his hat back on his head and walked toward her. When he reached her, the woman tried to sit up but failed. "We were heading west," she said weakly. "The car broke down this morning. I thought I could fix it, but I couldn't even stand." Her voice cracked as she spoke. The girl ran to her mother and held her hand tightly. John knelt beside them. He could see exhaustion in the woman's eyes, the kind that comes from more than one hard day. "You don't look too good, ma'am," he said softly. "You need water?" She nodded. He turned back to his truck, brought a canteen, and handed it to her. She drank slowly, like it was the first water she'd had all day. The girl tugged on his sleeve. "Sir, Mama hasn't eaten since yesterday," she whispered. John looked down at her small face, dust on her cheeks, worry in her eyes, and felt something shift deep inside. He remembered another little girl long ago smiling at him from the porch before she left for school. His daughter. That memory stung. He didn't say much after that. John wasn't a man of words. He looked at the mother again and saw that she couldn't even stand on her own. Without a word, he slipped his arms under her and lifted her gently. She was light, almost weightless, like a shadow. The girl gasped, surprised, and took a step back. "Climb on," John said to her. The little girl hesitated, unsure if she should. But when she looked at his calm eyes, she trusted him. She climbed onto his back, holding onto his neck tightly. Her small fingers pressed against his collar as the rancher carried them both across the dirt road toward his truck. The only sound was the creak of his boots and the low sigh of the wind. He opened the passenger door and carefully set the woman down on the seat. Then he helped the little girl climb in beside her. She looked up at him again and whispered, "Thank you, sir." John didn't answer. He walked around to the driver's side, got in, and started the engine. The headlights cut through the dusk, lighting up the endless stretch of road ahead. For a while, no one spoke. The woman rested her head against the window, half conscious. The girl held her hand, her thumb tracing circles over her mother's skin. John glanced at them once, then back to the road. He wasn't sure what he was doing, but something told him he couldn't leave them there. Maybe it was the way the girl had said "sir," or maybe it was the way her mother looked too tired to even hope. He knew what loneliness felt like, and he wouldn't let it swallow them too. After a few miles, the girl spoke again, her voice small and clear. "Do you live far, sir?" "Not far," John said. "Just down this road." She nodded and looked out the window. The night had fallen now, stars beginning to show. She pressed her hand against the glass and whispered, "It's pretty." John looked at her reflection in the window. Her eyes wide, her hair tangled, yet still full of quiet wonder. He felt something warm stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. When they reached his ranch, the lights from the porch glowed softly in the dark. The house stood lonely but strong, surrounded by the vast open land. John parked the truck and turned to the girl. "Let's get your mama inside." He carried the woman again through the creaking porch and into the living room. The air smelled faintly of coffee and old wood. He laid her down on the couch and covered her with a quilt. The girl followed him closely, still holding the torn blanket she'd carried all along. "She'll be fine," John said quietly. "Just needs rest." The girl nodded. She sat beside her mother and held her hand again. John went to the kitchen, filled a pot with water and set it on the stove. He found some bread and soup cans in the cupboard and began to warm them up. The sound of boiling water filled the silence. When he brought them food, the girl looked up at him with wide eyes. "You're kind, sir," she said softly. He shook his head. Just doing what anyone would do. But he knew not everyone would. The woman ate a few spoonfuls before she drifted into sleep. The little girl stayed awake, watching over her, whispering something under her breath. Maybe a prayer, maybe a promise. John sat by the window, staring out into the dark fields. He could hear the faint sounds of crickets and the soft breathing of the two strangers now sleeping under his roof. His hands rested on his knees. The house, once silent for years, suddenly felt alive again. He thought of his wife gone many winters ago and of his daughter who had moved away. The emptiness of those years had become part of him. But tonight that silence had broken. He looked back at the couch where the woman slept and at the child curled beside her, blanket pulled to her chin. The girl murmured softly in her sleep, something about angels on the road. John felt a lump in his throat. He took off his hat, placed it on the table, and whispered to himself, "Rest easy now. You're safe here." Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain. The ranch, for the first time in a long while, didn't feel empty. It felt like it was waiting for something. Maybe healing, maybe hope. John stayed awake a little longer, listening to the wind and the quiet breathing of the two lives he had found by chance. He didn't know who they were or where they came from. All he knew was that the road had led them to him, and that somehow in helping them, he felt a part of his own soul start to wake again. And that night, as the rain began to fall softly on the roof, John Matthews closed his eyes and realized, sometimes a man doesn't need words to show kindness. Sometimes lifting someone without a word can lift himself too. The next morning came slowly, with sunlight spilling through the curtains like a quiet promise. The smell of coffee filled the small kitchen as John Matthews stood by the stove, pouring a fresh pot into a chipped mug. He looked toward the living room and saw the woman still asleep on the couch. Her breathing was deeper now, peaceful. The little girl sat cross-legged on the floor beside her, holding an old ranch dog in her lap. The dog, a gray-haired shepherd named Duke, wagged his tail as she petted him gently. John cleared his throat softly, not wanting to startle them. "Morning," he said. The girl looked up and smiled shyly. "Good morning, sir," she answered. Her voice was clearer than last night, lighter somehow. "Mama's still sleeping." "That's all right," John replied. "She needs it." He took a few steps closer, his boots making soft thuds on the wooden floor. "You hungry, little one?" She nodded. "A bit," she said. John pointed toward the table. "Go sit there." "Got some eggs and bread." The girl stood, still clutching the blanket she had carried from the car. She climbed into the chair, swinging her legs as she looked around the room. It was a simple home. Old pictures on the wall, worn furniture, and the faint smell of hay that drifted in whenever the door opened. To her, it looked like safety. To him, it looked like memories. As the girl ate, she spoke in short bursts between bites. "Mama said we were going to Arizona. She said there's work there. But the car broke down. We waited for help, but no one came. Then Mama couldn't walk anymore. I thought she was gonna—" She stopped herself, her small face going quiet. John didn't press her to continue. "She's lucky you stayed by her side," he said. "Not everyone would have done that." The girl smiled faintly. "Mama says I'm her brave one." He nodded slowly, feeling that familiar ache in his chest again. "Yeah, you are." The sound of movement came from the couch. The woman stirred, trying to sit up. John walked over quickly, helping her to lean back against a cushion. "Take it easy," he said. "You're safe now." She blinked a few times, trying to remember where she was. "The ranch," she whispered. We're at your place?" He nodded. "You passed out last night. I didn't think driving you to town was smart. You needed rest." Her eyes softened. "You didn't have to help us, Mr. Matthews," he said. "John Matthews." "Thank you, Mr. Matthews," she said quietly. "I don't know what we would have done." John shrugged. "Would have been wrong to leave you there." He handed her a glass of water. "Drink this. Then I'll see if Doc Miller can come by from town." She shook her head. "Please don't trouble anyone. I just need rest. We'll be gone as soon as I can stand again." The little girl frowned. "Mama?" she began, but her mother squeezed her hand gently. "We can't stay too long," she said softly. John didn't argue. But something about her words sat heavy in his mind. He could tell she wasn't just tired, she was running from something. He didn't ask what. He had learned over the years that sometimes people don't need questions. They need space. After breakfast, John stepped outside to tend to his chores. The air was cool, carrying the scent of wet earth from last night's rain. He fed the horses, fixed a loose board on the barn, and checked the fence line. But his thoughts kept drifting back to the house, back to the woman lying on his couch, and the little girl who had brought light into a home that had known only silence for years. When he returned, he found the girl outside by the porch steps watching Duke chase the chickens. She laughed, the sound clear and bright. John stopped for a second, leaning against the rail. It had been a long time since he'd heard laughter like that on his land. "You like animals, huh?" he asked. She turned toward him, her eyes shining. "I love them. Mama says I used to talk to birds when I was little." John chuckled softly. "You can talk to the horses too if you want. They're good listeners." Her face lit up. "Really, can I see them?" He hesitated a moment, then nodded. "All right, but stay close." He led her to the barn. Inside, the smell of hay and saddle oil filled the air. The horses lifted their heads as they entered, curious about the new visitor. The girl gasped softly, her eyes wide with wonder. "They're beautiful," she whispered. She reached out to touch one of them, a brown mare named Daisy. The horse nuzzled her hand gently, as if sensing the kindness in her heart. John watched quietly, arms crossed, a faint smile touching his weathered face. "Seems Daisy likes you," he said. "She's soft," the girl said, giggling. "Can I feed her?" He handed her a few apple slices. She held one out carefully, and Daisy ate it from her palm. For a moment, the ranch felt alive again, the air lighter, the world a little warmer. Later that afternoon, John went inside to check on Mary, the woman. She was sitting up now, looking out the window. Her eyes followed the wide horizon where the land met the sky. "You have a beautiful place," she said quietly. "It's just old land," he replied. "Been in the family for generations. My wife and I built most of it together." She turned toward him slowly. "You live here alone now?" "Yeah," he said. "Been that way a while?" Mary nodded softly, understanding more from what he didn't say than what he did. "I'm sorry," she whispered. John waved a hand dismissively. "Don't be. Life has its own ways." There was a long silence, the kind that wasn't uncomfortable, just full of things that didn't need to be spoken. As evening approached, John made a simple dinner of stew and biscuits. The three of them sat together at the table. The girl talked about school, about how she wanted to be a nurse someday, so people like Mama don't hurt. John listened, smiling at her determination. Mary looked at her daughter with pride and sadness mixed in her eyes. After the meal, John cleaned up while Mary tried to stand. She managed to take a few steps, holding on to the edge of the table for support. "Careful," he said quickly, stepping forward. "I have to try," she said with quiet strength. "I can't just lie here," he admired that. "You're tougher than you look," he said. She smiled faintly. "I've had to be." That night, as the wind whistled outside, John sat by the fire again. The little girl had fallen asleep on the couch beside her mother, the blanket pulled over both of them. Their faces were calm, peaceful. John leaned back in his chair, staring into the flames. He wondered where they came from, what roads had led them here. Maybe it didn't matter. What mattered was that they were safe tonight. He got up quietly, walked to the door, and looked out into the night. The stars were clear, spread across the dark sky like dust from heaven. He felt something stir deep inside, something he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just pity. It was purpose. He realized that helping them had done more than give them shelter. It had brought life back into his own world. The silence that once haunted the ranch now carried the soft rhythm of breathing, laughter, and warmth. Before going to bed, John looked one last time at the woman and her child. The girl had turned in her sleep, one small hand resting on her mother's arm. The woman's lips moved slightly as if whispering a prayer. John whispered under his breath, "You're safe here. Both of you." Then he turned off the lamp and walked to his room. For the first time in many years, he didn't feel the cold emptiness of solitude. He felt the quiet peace that comes when a man does something right without needing thanks. Outside, the night settled gently over the ranch, wrapping everything in stillness. Somewhere in the dark, a coyote called in the distance, and the wind carried the sound far across the open land. John lay in bed, listening to the sound, and smiled faintly before drifting to sleep. The ranch was no longer silent. It had a heartbeat again. The morning sun rose again over the wide fields, painting the ranch in soft gold. The wind carried the smell of hay and damp earth from the night before. Inside the house, everything was quiet except for the soft crackle of the fire and the slow rhythm of breathing from the two guests sleeping on the couch. John Matthews stood near the window, sipping his coffee and staring out toward the barn. The world outside was the same as it had been for years, open, silent, endless, but something inside the house had changed. He could hear faint laughter from the kitchen soon after. The little girl, Lily, was feeding Duke a piece of bread, giggling as the old dog wagged his tail. Mary, her mother, was sitting up now, her hair tied back, looking a little stronger than the day before. She smiled when she saw John standing there. "You've been up early," she said. "Old habit," John replied.
"Cattle don't wait on anyone." Mary tried to stand.
Her legs still trembled, but she managed to keep her balance by holding the table. "You should sit," he said quickly, walking closer. "I'm fine," she said softly, though he could see the pain on her face. "I can't keep lying here. I need to do something." John looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "All right. You can help me in the kitchen, but only if you sit while doing it." She smiled faintly. "Deal." Lily clapped her hands. "I can help too." And just like that, the house that had been quiet for so long was alive with small sounds. Pots clinking, chairs moving, soft laughter. John didn't realize until then how much he had missed the sound of company. After breakfast, he walked out with Lily to feed the horses. She carried a small bucket of grain, her steps quick and full of excitement. "Do they remember me from yesterday?" she asked. John smiled. "Horses remember kindness." "You gave them apples, right?" "Yes. Daisy liked me the most," he chuckled. "Then she'll be waiting." At the barn, Daisy lifted her head the moment Lily stepped inside. The little girl giggled as she reached up to stroke the mare's nose. "See, she remembers." John leaned against the gate, watching her. "You're good with animals," he said. "Most kids your age are too scared to get close." Lily shrugged. "Mama says animals know when you mean no harm." He nodded slowly. "She's right." After a while, Mary walked out to the porch, her face turned toward the wind. She looked stronger today, but still pale. John noticed her eyes scanning the open land as if searching for something far beyond it. "You sure you're feeling all right?" he asked. "I'll manage," she said. "It's peaceful here. I almost forgot what quiet felt like." He nodded. "Quiet can be good. But too much of it," he paused, staring out at the field. "It can start to feel like a wall between you and the world." Mary looked at him carefully. "You've been behind that wall for a long time, haven't you?" John gave a half smile. "Maybe." She didn't ask more, and he was grateful. By noon, John had to ride into town for supplies. He wasn't gone long, but when he came back, he saw Lily sitting on the porch with a drawing pad and pencil, sketching the barn and horses. "You draw?" he asked, surprised. She nodded, showing him the picture. "It's not perfect, but I like it." He studied the sketch. The lines were uneven but full of life, just like her. "You've got talent," he said. "Maybe I'll draw you next," she said cheerfully. He laughed. "I don't think the paper's ready for that." Inside, Mary was washing the dishes, though he'd told her not to. "You don't have to," he said again, setting down the groceries. "I know," she said, smiling softly. "But it makes me feel normal." John nodded. "Fair enough." Later that evening, as the sky turned orange again, the three of them sat outside on the porch. Duke lay at their feet, snoring softly. The air was warm, the sound of crickets filling the space between words. Mary turned to John. "It's strange," she said. "Yesterday I thought we wouldn't make it another mile. And now we're here, safe, fed, rested." She paused. "Sometimes I think God sends people when we least expect it." John looked down, his hat resting on his knee. "Maybe so," he said quietly. "Or maybe the road just knows who needs to meet." Lily leaned against her mother's side, fighting sleep. "Mama," she mumbled, "I like it here. Can we stay longer?" Mary brushed her hair gently. "We can't, sweetheart. We still have a long way to go." John looked at the horizon, his jaw tightening slightly. "Where in Arizona were you headed?" "Prescott," she said. "My sister lives there. We were going to stay with her until I could find work." He nodded slowly. "That's a long drive." Mary looked down. If the car even starts again. I'll see to it, he said simply. The next morning, true to his word, John went to work on the car. He pulled it closer to the barn and lifted the hood. The engine was full of dust and old oil, but he knew machines. Piece by piece, he worked through it while Lily sat nearby handing him tools. "This one?" she asked, holding up a wrench. "That's the one," he said with a grin. Mary watched from the porch, the sunlight soft on her face. She hadn't seen her daughter smile this much in months. For the first time in a long while, the heaviness in her heart began to lift. By afternoon, John managed to get the engine to turn over weakly. "She's almost there," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Just needs new plugs and a bit of patience." Mary smiled gratefully. "You've done so much for us already. We don't know how to repay you," he shook his head. "Don't need repaying. Feels good to help." That night, Mary offered to cook, the kitchen filled with the smell of cornbread and stew, laughter bouncing off the walls. John sat at the table, feeling something he hadn't felt in years, belonging. When dinner ended, Lily placed a small piece of folded paper in front of him. "This is for you," she said. He opened it. Inside was a drawing of the ranch, the house, the barn, the horses, and in the center a man in a hat standing beside a little girl holding a dog. Underneath she had written in shaky letters, "Thank you, Mr. John." He stared at it for a long time, the lines blurring slightly as his eyes grew wet. "That's the best picture I've ever seen," he said softly. Lily grinned. "It's you. You look nicer when you smile." Mary laughed quietly, covering her mouth. John couldn't help but smile again. Later that night, after they had gone to bed, John sat by the fire once more. He looked around his home, the same walls, the same furniture, but it all felt different now. The air carried laughter instead of silence. The rooms held warmth instead of emptiness. He looked down at the drawing again. The little girl's handwriting, the uneven lines, it all felt real, alive. He whispered to himself, maybe this is what the ranch needed. Not repairs, just life again. Outside, the moon hung bright over the fields. The horses stirred softly. The wind brushed the tall grass, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called. Inside, the rancher finally allowed himself to feel something he had kept buried for years. Peace. He folded the drawing carefully and placed it inside his jacket pocket. Then he turned off the lamp and sat in the quiet glow of the fire, thinking about how strange life was, that sometimes the people you save end up saving you too. The days passed quietly on the ranch, and the rhythm of life began to change without anyone really noticing. The sun rose each morning over the hills, and instead of silence, the air carried the sound of laughter, footsteps, and soft conversation. For the first time in many years, the old house didn't feel empty. John Matthews found himself looking forward to every sunrise, not because of the work waiting for him, but because there were now two people who made the long days feel shorter. Mary was recovering faster. Each day she tried to help with simple chores, folding clothes, washing dishes, sweeping the porch. She moved slowly, still careful with her leg, but her determination was stronger than her pain. John often told her to rest, but she would only smile and say, "I need to feel useful." Lily followed him everywhere. Whether it was feeding the chickens or checking the fences, she was always there, asking questions, curious about everything. "Do the cows have names?" she once asked. John smiled. "Not all of them, but the stubborn ones do." She laughed. "Then what's this one's name?" He looked at the brown cow munching lazily on hay and said, "That's Betsy. She thinks she owns the place." Lily giggled, holding her little notebook close. "I'm writing their names down, so I don't forget." John found himself laughing more these days. It was small at first, a quiet chuckle, a soft smile. But slowly, the hard shell around his heart began to crack. Each day spent with Lily reminded him of the daughter he once had, the one whose laughter had filled this same ranch years ago before fate took her away. One afternoon, while fixing the fence, John noticed Mary sitting nearby under a tree. She was watching Lily chase Duke around the field, her eyes filled with warmth. John walked over, wiping sweat from his forehead. "She's got energy," he said. Mary smiled. "She always has. Even when I was at my weakest, she kept going. I don't know how she does it." "Kids see hope where adults forget to look," John replied quietly. Mary looked at him for a moment. You sound like someone who's been through loss. He didn't answer right away. Yeah, he finally said, his voice low. My wife passed away years back. My daughter left after that. Haven't seen her in a long time. Mary's eyes softened. I'm sorry. He nodded. It's life. You can't fight the wind, you just learn to stand against it. For a while they sat in silence, watching the sun drift lower in the sky. Lily ran across the field with Duke barking behind her, her laughter echoing across the open land. Mary looked at her daughter, then at John. You gave her that laughter back, she said softly. John shook his head. She already had it. I just gave it a place to come out again. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mary joined John on the porch for coffee. The sky was painted in soft orange and pink, and the air smelled like warm dust and wildflowers. Lily was inside, humming to herself as she colored another picture. You ever think about leaving here? Mary asked after a long pause. John looked out toward the fields. Used to. Thought about selling the ranch a few times, but I guess I didn't have anywhere else to go. Maybe this place needs you, she said. Or maybe you need it. He smiled faintly. Maybe both. Over the next few days, they settled into a quiet routine. John taught Lily how to saddle Daisy, the brown mare who had taken a liking to her. Mary started cooking more, insisting on preparing dinners to thank him for his kindness. And every evening, they would sit outside together, sometimes talking, sometimes just letting the silence speak for them. But not every day was easy. There were moments when John caught himself feeling a sadness he couldn't explain, a fear that once they left, the silence would return and the laughter would fade again. He never said it out loud, but Mary could sense it. She had seen the same quiet fear in her own reflection. One afternoon, John drove into town for new spark plugs and fuel. When he returned, he found Lily waiting by the gate, waving both hands. Mr. John, she shouted. Mama walked to the barn today. John stopped the truck, smiling. She did? Yes. She said she wanted to see where you work. She even helped me brush Daisy. When he stepped into the barn, he saw Mary standing beside the horse, sunlight streaming in behind her. Her face was brighter, her eyes alive again. She looked up at him and said, I thought it was time I thanked you properly. For everything. He tipped his hat slightly. No need for that. There is, she said gently. You helped us when no one else did. You didn't even ask why we were on that road or where we came from. John shrugged. Didn't need to know you were in trouble, that was enough. She smiled softly. Still, not many people would stop anymore. He didn't argue. He knew she was right. That evening after dinner, Lily ran to the porch and tugged at his sleeve. Mr. John, come see this. He followed her outside. The stars had come out early, filling the sky like glittering dust. She pointed upward. Look, that one's the brightest. He nodded. That's the North Star. Travelers used it to find their way home. She looked up thoughtfully. So if you're lost, you just look at it and it shows you where to go? Something like that, he said. She smiled. Then maybe that's your star, too. You found us. John's chest tightened. He looked down at her and said softly, Maybe you found me instead. Mary stood quietly in the doorway listening. She didn't say anything, but her eyes glistened. The next morning, John worked on the car again. The engine finally roared to life. Mary and Lily stood nearby, clapping their hands in excitement. You did it, Lily shouted. John smiled, trying to hide the heaviness in his heart. Looks like you'll be ready to head west soon. Mary's smile faded slightly. Yes, soon. For the rest of the day, the air felt different. No one said it out loud, but they all felt the same thing. The quiet sadness of knowing something good was ending. That night, as they shared dinner, the mood was gentle and calm. Lily drew another picture, this time of the three of them standing by the barn with Duke lying at their feet. She handed it to John with a grin. You have to keep this one too, she said. I will, he promised. Mary looked at him for a long time. You've given us more than help, John. You gave us hope. He didn't know how to respond, so he simply nodded and said, You gave me something too. When the lights went out, that night, John lay awake for a long time listening to the soft rustle of the wind outside. The house, once cold and silent, now carried the warmth of memories being made. He knew their time together was nearing its end, but something told him that no matter where they went, part of their hearts would stay on this land. And for the first time in years, John Matthews felt a quiet peace, because even if the road would take them away, the kindness they shared would remain, as steady as the North Star above them. The morning they were supposed to leave arrived softly, with pale light stretching across the land and a cool wind brushing through the open fields. John Matthews stood on the porch long before the others woke. The ranch looked the same as always, the barn doors slightly open, the horses stirring, the dog resting by the steps, but something in the air felt heavier. The silence wasn't empty this time. It carried the weight of goodbye. Inside the house, Mary was folding the last of their things into a small travel bag. She moved slowly, her legs still not strong enough for quick steps, but she no longer needed help to walk. The little girl Lily sat near the window drawing on a scrap of paper, humming softly to herself. Her hair was tied back with a red ribbon Mary had found in the kitchen drawer. John pushed the door open, holding a mug of coffee. You two up early, he said. Mary looked up and smiled faintly. Couldn't sleep much. Lily turned toward him. We're leaving today, right? John nodded. Yeah, car's ready. Runs better than before. The girl nodded but didn't smile. She looked down at her drawing instead. It was a picture of the ranch house under a big sun, with the three of them standing near the fence. At the bottom, in her uneven handwriting, she had written, Home. John saw it and swallowed hard. That's a nice picture, he said quietly. It's for you, she said, her voice small, so you don't forget us. He took it gently from her hands. I won't, he said. Not ever. Mary finished packing and looked around the room one last time. The wooden walls, the worn furniture, the faint smell of coffee and hay, it had all come to feel familiar. Feels strange leaving, she said softly. It's only been a few days, but it feels like we've lived a small lifetime here. John nodded. That's what happens when folks find peace after a long road. They stepped outside together. The air was bright and crisp, the sky wide and cloudless. The repaired car stood by the fence, clean and ready for the long trip west. Duke trotted around their feet, wagging his tail, sensing the change in mood. Mary turned to John. You really didn't have to do all this, she said. I did, he replied simply. Because someone once stopped for me when I needed help. Guess it was my turn. She looked at him with quiet gratitude. If the world had more people like you, maybe it wouldn't be so hard. John gave a small smile. World's got plenty of good folks. They just don't make much noise about it. Lily ran up to him suddenly and wrapped her small arms around his waist. You'll miss me, right? She asked. He looked down at her, his throat tight. More than you know. Can I come visit when we get to Arizona? She asked. You better, he said with a chuckle. Daisy'll miss you too. Mary stood beside the car, watching them. There was something in her eyes, part sadness, part warmth. We should get going before the day gets too hot, she said gently. John helped her into the passenger seat, then lifted Lily into the back. He stood there for a moment, unsure what to say. The car engine started with a low rumble, steady and strong. Mary looked up at him through the open window. You'll be all right here? She asked. He nodded. Always have been, she smiled faintly. You're a good man, John Matthews. He tipped his hat. You're a strong woman, Mary, don't forget that. Lily leaned out the window and waved as the car began to roll forward. Bye, Mr. John. Don't forget us. He waved back, his hand steady but his heart heavy. Never will. He stood there watching as the car moved down the long dirt road. The morning sun glinted off the windshield, and before long they were just a small shape against the horizon, swallowed by the golden distance. The wind blew gently, carrying the faint echo of a little girl's laughter. The ranch was quiet again. John turned and walked slowly back toward the house. Inside, everything was exactly as it had been before, but not really. There was life in the air now, memories that had settled into the walls and the silence. On the table lay Lily's last drawing. He picked it up again, smoothing the edges with his thumb. The word home stared back at him in those shaky letters. He hung the drawing above the fireplace right next to an old photograph of his wife and daughter. The paper fluttered slightly in the draft, catching the light from the window. For a long time, John just stood there looking at the two pictures side by side, the family he had lost and the one that had found him for a little while. Days passed, then weeks. The road outside stayed empty, but John's days no longer felt lonely. He worked with a lighter heart, whistling while feeding the cattle, sometimes catching himself talking to Daisy about the weather, or telling Duke that the fence needed fixing. When the evenings came, he'd sit on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sky turn orange. He found himself thinking about Mary and Lily often. He wondered if they'd reached Arizona safely, if Mary had found her sister, if Lily was still drawing horses and stars. Sometimes he'd glance toward the road, half expecting to see that dusty car coming back down the hill. Then one afternoon, as he was mending the fence near the pasture, he heard the sound of tires crunching over gravel. He turned around and saw the mail truck pulling up by the gate. The driver waved. "Got something for you, Mr. Matthews." John wiped his hands on his jeans and walked over. The driver handed him a small envelope. It was neatly sealed with a few childlike doodles drawn along the edge, stars, flowers, and a tiny horse. His heart skipped a beat. He took it inside, sat down at the table, and opened it carefully. Inside was a folded letter and a photograph. The letter was written in Lily's uneven handwriting. "Dear Mr. John, we reached Arizona. Mama's better now and she has a job at a store. Aunt Clara is nice and she made me a room with yellow curtains. But I miss the ranch and Daisy and Duke. Mama says you're the kind of man people don't forget. I drew another picture for you. I hope you smile when you see it. Love, Lily." He unfolded the picture. It showed Mary standing strong beside her sister's house, and Lily holding a small sign that said, "For the man who stopped." On the back of the photo, in Mary's handwriting, were a few simple words. "We walked again, because you carried us." John sat back in his chair, staring at the photo for a long time. The room was quiet except for the ticking of the clock. He felt a warmth spread through his chest, soft and steady, like sunlight after rain. He placed the picture beside the drawing above the fireplace. Together, they told a story without needing many words, a story of kindness, second chances, and the quiet way people can change each other's lives. That evening, as the sky turned gold and pink again, John walked out to the porch. Duke lay at his feet. The horses grazed in the distance, and the wind carried the scent of wildflowers. The ranch was still quiet, but it no longer felt lonely. He took off his hat, looked toward the long road that disappeared into the horizon, and smiled faintly. "You're both doing fine out there," he said softly. "I can feel it." The wind rustled through the grass, almost like a reply. John sat down, leaning back in his chair as the last light of the day faded. Somewhere out there, a little girl was probably looking at the same sky, maybe pointing out the North Star again. And he knew, deep in his heart, that even though miles separated them, they would always be connected by that one simple moment, the day he stopped his truck on a dusty road and chose to care. The world didn't change because of it. But for three souls it had, and that, John thought as he closed his eyes and listened to the wind, was enough.